Okay, when was Lynne inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame?
2000.
Good girl.
Oh, there really was a quiz.
Okay, how many world records has Lynne Cox held during her career?
52.
Okay, it's not 60, but what? 59. Here it goes. Man, I got a couple. Who was the first woman to swim Cook Strait? Okay. But how about this one? When she climbed out of the water, how many New Zealanders waited for her on the beach?
30,000. 30,000.
Here we go. That's good. What is Lynne Cox's most famous swim?
Antarctica.
Who said Bering Strait first?
Bering Strait.
Who said Bering Strait second?
Me.
Rock and roll! This is getting rambunctious.
Okay, those things happen. When you're having fun, those things happen. Here's the hardest question I had. When she swam Bering Straits, did she swim from Little Diomede to Big Diomede, or Big Diomede to Little Diomede?
Yes.
Where are you? Little Diomede to Big Diomede. So when she did her
Audio
swim to
test.
Antarctica, which TV show featured that?
60 minutes.
60 minutes.
I read the email.
I told you there'd be a test. How many books has Lynne Cox written?
6.
8. You said-
I was gonna say she was authority.
How many of them were New York Times bestsellers?
2.
2.
Soon it's gonna be 3.
Okay, so
What's the airspeed velocity of a pigeon?
in order to introduce Lynne Cox, I want to tell you what my personal definition of a marathon open water swimmer is. And for me, there are people who, through athletic training and planning and, excessive gifts in swimming really, are really, artists who draw, I think, line drawings across large aquatic landscapes. At the level that Lynne and other people like her do it rises to an art form. And the South End and the Dolphin Club are extremely unique in the fact that, we have a number of people that also swim to that standard. And, some of them are here in this room with us today. Let me explain. So if I were to take all of Lynne's 59 swims, and if I were to take the tracks of those swims, and if I were to put them, overlay them maybe, even one along the other, it would form an artistic shape. And it would be divisible by thirds, in my opinion. And if you framed it and put it on the wall, somebody would consider it an art piece. So I think that, for me, at least in my terms, Lynne rose, well above that standard. And really, for our era, kind of personified that, at least in my definition. But really, her career also had a little bit more, because it also had a message with it. And that message for me, was that if we are all capable of a little bit more if only we would try. And it extended to risking life itself in the search in Antarctica. There were 2 doctors in the water that waited to see if her heart would seize when she jumped into the water. And, well, this is just a little bit of digression, but I always, I thought it was amusing when, on 60 Minutes, when she came out, they were filming it, and when she came out and sat on the steel rail of a ship in the Antarctic, her first words were, "Oh my, it's cold." But now Lynne has changed art forms, and so now she's writing. And if we're watching closely, we're watching somebody, mature into a writer. And Tales for Now, is her 8th book. It's her best. It's lyrical in passages. It's a compelling, human story about a certain type of dog and the people who dedicate their lives to training them to rescue swimmers. And so I'll let you tell her the rest. And so will you please help me in welcoming Lynne Cox.
I love to be at the South End. There's no place in the world like this. I grew up in Southern California primarily and started doing the open water swims. And I really wasn't mainstream. And now I come here and I realize that none of you are mainstream either. I feel like I fit right in with this group. It is so special. So thank you so much for coming today. And so, do you remember those first days where you learned to swim? Where you had your mom, your dad, or swim instructor, and then they launched you and you started swimming. You remember that feeling. And then you remember that time that you started doing open water swimming, where you transitioned from the pool, or from the backyard pool, or from the wide pool, and started swimming in the open water. For me, I think that sense of mystery and also scariness that you get of am I going to be okay if I swim in the open water? I think that takes a huge amount of courage that you take that step. Step out of this pool where it's all warm and you're going to finish, and at the other end there's a lane line you can hold on to or you can reach the other side. But with the open water swim, it's a huge adventure. You never know what's going to happen. And I think it takes special people to want to swim in the open water. But I also think it takes special dogs who want to do this as well. So the reason I went to Italy was because one of my swimming friends said, hey, have you seen these dogs in Italy that leap out of helicopters into lakes and rescue people? And I just thought, growing up off the coast of Southern California, there were people in my life that were lifeguards that would watch over me. There was one guy named Jeff Gates who was with Long Beach Lifeguards. And so I'd swim for 2 or 4 hours longshore and come out of the water. And he was a philosopher and a teacher of Greek and Latin studies at UC Santa Barbara. So he'd give me all sorts of stuff to think about, and then I'd go back in the water and swim. But the cool thing was that I knew he always had his eyes on me, that he was always concerned, and along with lifeguards off the coast of Long Beach. There was also a guy named Kim Perdisic. There wasn't any girls' water polo team in high school, but there was the Los Alamitos High School water polo team, and the coach asked if I'd play on the boys' team. So I said yes, if the boys want me. So they voted and decided they would let me on the team, which was really great because I love playing water polo and I love playing on the team with them. But there was one guy named Kim Perdisic, and he and a guy named Pat West worked at Huntington State Lifeguard, and they would patrol the beach at night. And now I look at this and think, what did my parents let me do? I would go and start a workout at 7 o'clock at night, swimming parallel to the shore on my own, and swim until 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And so Pat and Kim Perdisic would drive along in the Jeep and shine the lights on the water to watch over me as I was swimming.
Bring in the sharks.
So these connections between being able to do these really weird things and having people watching out for me really connected deeply with me. My sister was the first female Huntington Beach State lifeguard, the beach lifeguard, and my brother lifeguarded for LA County and for Long Beach. So this whole thing about lifeguarding and being connected to that was something that was super interesting to me. So, having seen this dog leap out of the water and be a lifeguard, I just went, wow, I've got to go to Italy and find out more about this. Well, how do you get in touch with the Italian Scuola Italiana Carne Salvataggio, Italian School for Water Rescue Dogs? How do you reach out to them? But, you know, when you're a swimmer, you sort of have these connections all over the world. And there was a guy that I knew named John Chalice, who had been an F-4 pilot stationed in the Mediterranean, and he lived in Rome. And in passing, he had told me that his friend was a naval attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Rome. So I thought, you know, okay, these dogs supposedly work with the Italian Coast Guard, the Costiera Guardia Costiera, and so maybe they know, maybe the U.S. Embassy knows, the naval attaché will know how to get a hold of the Coast Guard. So through that connection, I got an email probably 3 days later from Donatella Pasquale. And so you'll see the cover of the book, that's Al, and Al now is 12 years old. Donatella was the vice president of the school, and she invited me to come to the Milan area to watch the dogs train. So my first thought was, you know, kids are trained to swim, and sometimes they're trained really gently, and the child gets to learn how to coordinate and get stronger, and then eventually swims. And then there are times where a parent will just take a child and launch the child into the water. And, you know, that just makes me cringe. But so I really wanted to see how they were training the dogs. And so I was invited to go to the lake. And it was so cool because the lake area was set off just for the school for water rescue dogs. It was like the South End. You know, you had your own little place on the beach, and there it was. And in the very edge of the lake were where the puppies trained, the beginners. And then they had the intermediates, and then the advanced, and then the elite dogs. And they would train with their owners. So the puppies were learning to swim. The beginners were learning how to work, not just with their owner and trainer, but if I was really good at teaching the dog to do something, and you were better, then I would give you my dog to work with my dog. So there was a sense of team and helping each other out, which was so cool and fun to watch. The dogs train with their owners from spring into fall. Then the owners will train doing other things with their dogs, but the lakes freeze over, so they can't swim in the wintertime. I was invited to go to the lake to do some of the training with the water rescue dog school people. So Ferruccio Palenga, who was the head of the school, who came up with the idea for this 25 years ago, because his Newfoundland rescued his daughter. He invited me to go out into the water, swim about 50 meters offshore, and then he released his dog. Her name was Mass, and she was massive. She was about 150 pounds.
Wow.
And I was told what I'm supposed to do is lift my arms up like this and splash the water. So he let her go, and she sprinted out to get me. But she didn't come right to me. She did this sort of wide circle around me and watched me as she circled. And then she moved in close and circled again and presented this handle on top of her harness that had flotation in it. So when I grabbed onto it, it sort of lifted me up. And then she just pulled me right into shore. It was the coolest thing. I was actually in Alaska years ago with Martin Guzer, who had won the Iditarod a number of times, and he let me go with him on his training with the dogs. And so you sit in this little vehicle that's on wheels, and the dogs pull you. So it felt kind of like that, where you had this dog just like towing you in. So a while ago, somebody asked me, well, if you have lifeguards on the beach, why do you need to have dogs? I mean, you already have people there, and what good is a dog? Well, the Newfoundlands can pull in 6 people at a time. The Labradors they train, the Labradors, Goldens, German Shepherds, Italian Spinoni, and Leonbergers. Leonbergers are these huge dogs that were bred in Germany to look like lions because they were the mascot for this town in Germany. And the Leonbergers were used in this training, but also to do rescue. And they're used a lot in the United States as assistance dogs now. So I was with them as they let Mas do this, pull me ashore, reached the shore, and then I asked Ferruccio, could we do this again? And Mas is like, yeah, let's do it again. so I swam 100 meters offshore, and she sprinted out. This time, she swam right in close to me. She knew already who I was and that I wasn't afraid. And that was what Ferruccio told me, was that the dogs were trained not to go right up to a person immediately, because there are a lot of people that are afraid of dogs. And culturally, some cultures do not like dogs. They think they're really filthy. So because of that, the dogs are taught to move around and look at the person, see how the person reacts. And if the dog feels comfortable, then the dog will swim in closer and grab a hold. If the person is afraid, they don't just leave the dog, the person there floating in the water and struggling. The person that's helping the owner is able to grab the person that's drowning and has a buoy and will pull them to shore. But the dog is a primary rescuer. And the Labradors and the other dogs I mentioned can all pull in 2 to 3 people at a time. The other thing about having these dogs patrolling the beaches is that it's all volunteer. That they train all the time to be able to walk along the beaches in Italy, but also along the lakes. And they also go to Switzerland and Germany and train with the people there. The influence of this has been really cool, because nowadays in Switzerland and Germany they have water rescue programs with the dogs. And in the United States, the Newfoundland Club of America has started a program where they do the water testing and water rescue, which is different than what they do in Italy. And then they do the same thing in Canada, where they have dogs training. So after I did this initial water rescue with Mas, we did the second time. She went out, she got me, she pulled me about 25 meters, and I intentionally let go of her harness to see what would happen. And she immediately felt the resistance change, and she circled right around me and presented the harness again. So I held on to it. We got about 25 meters from shore, and I let go again. She circled around me and looked at me. Are you stupid? Hold on to the harness. So she pulled me in. So the dogs were incredible. The owners are amazing. And the cool thing is that, they do leap, like, from the ceiling into the water to rescue people. So I thought, how do you train a dog to do that? Because many dogs, like people, are not happy at being at heights. And if you leap from really high areas, it can hurt a lot. So they explained to me that the dogs first learn how to leap off the docks. And once they get that done, then they will go to Zodiac boats and leap off the pontoons there. And then if they pass certain qualification tests, they're able to go with the Italian Coast Guard. And they leap from the bow of the boats to the water. So that is almost the same height as the way the helicopters are lowered to the water. The dogs train constantly, and the owners do as well. And so the owners sometimes will swim a mile, and the Newfoundlands just cruise along. The fun thing that I really enjoy, I love to watch the different breeds of dogs training. I mean, it's like watching people swim. Everyone has their own stroke, everyone swims at their own pace, somebody has more flexibility than somebody else. And so, there was one golden retriever that just cracked me up, because she would lift up her head, take a breath, and put her face in the water and blow bubbles. Like, how did that dog learn to do that? And then when she did it, her hips would come up. And because her hips came up, then she swam faster than the other dogs in the water. There were Labradors that, how eager the labs are. Like, let me go, let me do, let me whatever. You could see them swimming like the sprinter. They were so fast. And then there was one golden retriever. She was, I think, 3 years old, and she swam like this little old lady. She dog paddled, and I just imagined the floral cap of her head as she swam along. It was great. The German Shepherds were very different as well. They were tighter swimmers like the sprinter, and they were totally focused. There was nothing that was leisure about what they were doing. And the Newfoundlands, they swam differently than the other dogs. They have huge paws, and they have lots of webbing between their toes. And so Ferruccio, the head of the school, explained to me that they swim an abbreviated breaststroke. So while Mass was swimming, I took a deep breath and went down under the water. And you could see her sweeping strokes, and then her hind legs kicking, and you just thought, these dogs were made to swim. So, you all with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good. It's so nice to talk to swimmers. I mean, you can talk about things you can't talk about to anyone else. All kinds of things, you know? So, the Italian water rescue dog people are a lot like the group here, where you would swim together, they would swim together. They'd work out hard, or they'd do an event, and then they'd all gather together and have food. And during that time they had food, they would have the dogs join them and sit outside on patios. And you see these great big bear dogs lying, like they couldn't go under the table because they were so big. They sprawled out, and the waiters would walk around them and put food on the table. The dogs would have eaten before we ate, so they would be just snoozing. And the book that I wrote was partly told over this long Italian meal. And so the ingredients of the meal and what we experienced during that talk is something I wrote about. The thing about Al is that she was like the coach's kid. She didn't really get what she was supposed to be doing. She didn't really rise up to meet the expectations of Donatella. And it was really embarrassing to Donatella because she really was known as the dog whisperer. People that went to the school, if they had a problem with their dog, Donatella knew what the dog needed to learn or what the owner needed to learn to be able to be successful. One of the things that I appreciated so much was the owners, the trainers, all adored their dogs. They never scolded them, they never swatted them, they never yelled at them. They were always using patience and positive reinforcement. And so it was really fascinating to see this, but beyond that, there were things that I learned when I was a kid from coaches. I had, Olympic coaches during my career that helped me do the stuff that I've done. And they were extraordinary people because they could see the promise in you and know exactly what you needed to do to get to that next level. The same thing happened with these dogs. And so Donatella, although she had Al, she was trying to get her to that next level. And she had a dog named Alicia, who was also a brown Newfoundland. And Alicia had won awards all over Italy. She'd been on Italian television, German television, French television. She was well known in Japan. You could walk her around Italy and people would stop and say, "Is that Alicia?" So then Donatella got Al and hoped that Alicia would help to train Al. And that's normally what happens at the school, where the older dogs will be enlisted to teach the less experienced dogs. A lot like what goes on here. We have the older dogs helping the younger ones into the water and using their experience in piloting and all that stuff, the same kind of parallels. I hope you don't mind I say that, but there's so many parallels between, the old dogs and the new dogs. So the Alicia was trying to teach Al, she wasn't getting it. I arrived in Italy at a time when Donatella was going to meet with the Italian Coast Guard to take Al through a series of water tests. So this is when the dog becomes an elite water rescue dog, when the dog gets to go on board the Coast Guard boat and patrol the coast with the Italian Coast Guard along with the owner. If the dog succeeds, the dog and owner are invited back and they get to help out throughout the summertime and into fall. But if the dog doesn't succeed, the dog may never be invited back again. So, or never reach that level. And so I've been talking a lot to people that have Newfoundlands now, mostly because the feature of the book is as Al. And I found out that not all dogs learn at the same rate. And it's not age dependent. It's about the dog, it's himself or herself. So I was talking to a woman in Kansas City area who has 2 Newfoundlands. And the Newfoundland Club of America has volunteered to have dogs come to some of my book signings. So she was telling me that her 6-month-old dog had learned how to, if she threw a rope out to imitate retrieving and pulling somebody in, she threw a rope out, the 6-month-old dog could reach out and swim out immediately and pull the rope in. She also had a 10-year-old Newfoundland who she had tried for 10 years to get her to do this. And she had no interest whatsoever in retrieving the rope until about 2 weeks ago. And so suddenly, at 10 years old, she decided that she wants to start water rescue training. That's what's so cool, though, is that they let the dogs be their own person. They don't have to be like everyone else. Just trying to think what else I need to touch on here, because there was so much to the book. There was so much. Oh, there was one thing. Okay, this was a cool thing, where if a dog couldn't learn a certain task on a certain day, then the owner wouldn't keep pushing it to try to get the dog to do it. They'd back down to do a skill the dog could succeed at and feel good about. And then they would try again another day, or they would try to have another person step in and help the dog learn that skill. So what they were always reinforcing was success instead of reinforcing not success.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the way I was brought up when I had Don Gamble as my coach and Jim Montrella and other Olympic coaches, is that they would not reinforce that you didn't make it. They would reinforce that you did well before. Maybe there's something more you could do to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So the story is really back to what I started off with, the first strokes, about love, courage, patience, devotion, and the belief that you can find the best within somebody and reach that level. And the dogs and people trained to do this elite level of water rescue. And it's something so special because they're giving of themselves. And that's really why I wrote the book, to be able to honor that and celebrate those people that help us do the things that we do and watch over us. So if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. If you want to know where I'm going to be on the book tour for the next 7 weeks, it's crazy. You just go to Lynne Cox, www.lynnecox.com. And I'm going to be continuing up the West Coast. Yeah.
Lynn, the dog is getting trained and they were rewarded. Do they get to play? Do they get to play with balls? Do they get to play with... That's something you mentioned in your book.
That's a great question. Do the dogs get to play with toys? Because I actually said, okay, you work so hard, you train so hard, and at the end of the workouts, do you get out a tennis ball and just throw it and then let the golden retriever go after it? Or what happens? And they said, no, we never use toys. We never use tennis balls. We have to be more exciting and interesting than the tennis ball. So the dog and the person create this bond together. And now Donatella has told me that, Al's, I think, 12 years old now, and when Donatella looks at Al, Al knows what Donatella wants. And vice versa. When Al looks at Donatella, Donatella knows in that glance what she wants. So these bonds are so strong, and their friendships and consistency and love goes through all these years. But also, like the South End, where you have these long friendships and connections, the same thing happens with this group. So there are members of this club that have been there for now almost 25 years. Yeah.
Are these dogs, are they good in really rough water? Like wavy, turbulent water?
That's a great question. Are the dogs good in rough water? Actually, they do a lot of the training in really rough water, and they train in Lake Idroscarlo, which is an Italian lake in the northern part near Milan. And there are mountains all around, so the wind funnels on the lake, so they get that really rough chop on the water. So the dogs train in different conditions, just like we do. So they're able to, for instance, when the dog jumps out of the helicopter, followed by the owner, there's so much rotor wash, so the waves are kicked up, and the dog just goes like, no big deal, not a problem at all. And last summer, there was an article in People magazine. There were 3 Labradors and their owners were patrolling the beach and saw 14 kids on rubber inflatable rafts that had been sucked up by a current. The 3 Labradors and owners spotted it and went out and pulled them all in. So it's part of what they do is spectacular like that, but often what they do is just every day-to-day prevention. One of the things I wound up writing about in the book too is that not everyone does this kind of lifting their arms to show that they're drowning. My brother and sister, I remember when they were lifeguarding in Long Beach area, there'd be little kids that would walk into the water and suddenly the bottom would drop off and they would just go under. So they call that silent drowning, and that's a term that's now used by the different coast guards in the world where there are people sometimes can't get their arms up. So just being aware and watching the water can make a difference between somebody being safe and not. But the dogs are only cued into doing the lift your arms up, because otherwise they'd be out there all the time pulling people in. I'm going to dive under and see if they'll follow me. Any more? Yeah.
You mentioned this just now briefly, and when I read Grayson out loud to my kids, it struck me that you were like out swimming by yourself and training alone in the dark in the ocean. And my question was, like, what age did you start doing that?
Actually, when I was 14 years old, we started swimming in the dark. I was training with 4 other swimmers, teenagers, to swim across the Catalina Channel. So Andy Taylor was 12, I was 14, Stacy was 14, and Nancy Dale was 14. So we all trained at night, and actually that was my dad's idea, to be able to acclimate to swimming at night and to get used to it. And I found out recently that I hadn't even known this, but again, my dad was sort of ahead of his time because he was a physician and knew about physiology and all that a lot of people that try Catalina Channel swims, or San Pedro to be more accurate, wind up getting seasick because they aren't used to swimming at night, and they aren't used to trying to find a balance and focus. So that swimming at night helped a lot. But it wasn't until I was 17 years old and could drive myself to work out that I was swimming alone at night, which now I think about it and think, what were my parents thinking? Was that really a smart thing to do? Yeah, I don't know. But I guess so.
Very clear, no.
No, it wasn't smart. Okay, well.
But it was a great story.
Thank you. No, I think too that because we grew up swimming as a family because they knew that I would swim parallel to shore just outside the wave break, and there were people along the way that were sort of watching over me. That was why I was able to do that. But I was talking to Steve, my husband, saying, gee, I don't know if I had children, if I'd let them do what I did. As we get older, we kind of go, oh my gosh, what did I do? And would I let my kids do that? Probably not. Any more questions? Yeah.
I got a few minutes late, so maybe you already answered it, but how did the dog rescue start?
How did the dog rescue start? So Ferruccio Palenga had a Newfoundland dog himself. His original dog was named Mas, and then he had a second dog named Mas. But the first dog named Mas was a family pet. And one day he said that his daughter and the daughter's friend were playing in the water along the coast of Italy somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, and they got pulled out by a current, and the dog went in and pulled in both of them.
So the whole thing, all these dogs being trained,
yeah,
5 years.
That was his idea, because he thought these dogs instinctively are trained to pull in fishing nets. So the dogs, the Newfoundlands and the Labradors were ship's dogs that came from Spain and Europe and landed in Newfoundland. And then they were bred to work on board the ships. And so the dogs they have these huge fishing nets and then long ropes. And the dogs would have to grab onto the ropes and pull the lines and the nets to shore. They had a hard time holding on and breathing, so the dogs were specifically bred with loose lips, so they could breathe. So a lot of times you go, oh, the dog's slobbering, that's gross. Well, it's because the dog needed to breathe. But now a lot of the Newfoundlands are now dry mouths, where they're intentionally bred because they don't have to pull in fishing lines anymore. They're bred so they don't do the drooling. But if you're part of this group in Italy and your dog starts drooling, I have a handkerchief in my back pocket and I just wipe off your dog's face. And if you saw her dog drooling, then you do the same thing. So it's like raising the kids together. Okay, well, one more question.
Have you seen dogs in waves or in surfing environments?
Have I seen dogs in waves or surfing environment? Actually,
Trained dogs?
yeah, actually, the story starts with me, part of the story, in Laguna Beach. I was dog sitting for 3 Newfoundlands. And so I didn't know that the 2 dogs, Pork and Beans and Otis, 3 dogs, Pork and Beans and Otis, were great swimmers. The owner told me they were great swimmers, but I didn't know they were into body surfing. So I described what it was like to be in Emerald Bay near Laguna Beach, swimming with them, and suddenly the surf starts to come up, and they're like, "Come on, let's go." So they have like chests that are like this, you know, like the bows of boats. So they were great body surfers. This stuff we do for fun, right? Yeah, thank you.
So, who's the lady with the cards? Okay. So she's going to stand over here. If you want to buy a book, just get a card. The first 20 people line up, and let Lynn get settled here in a minute. And but also, if you could just give your attention to Dr. Mills for a second, and he's going to provide some chair massages for you if you want. Where you wait. There's also hot dogs and beverages in the back. And thanks for your attention.
All right, thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Sophia. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I really appreciate the opportunity just to come down and introduce ourselves, let you know this resource is right here in town. So my name is Dr. Scott. I've been a chiropractor for about 12 years, and our practice group is called SF Custom Chiropractic. We've got 3 offices around the city, in the Castro, Mission Bay, as well as literally 1 block up the street on Hyde. So if you need anything, we specialize in sports chiropractic care. We're all certified in a soft tissue technique called active release technique. Has anybody ever heard of ART or active release? Yeah. If you've ever been around Ironman USA, that's the official providers for Ironman, or active release technique providers. So that's the technique that I specialize in, as well as all of our providers. We also have an awesome massage therapist. She's here doing sample massages for y'all. Just the only thing I'd ask is if you do want to do that, just throw down your name and contact information so we can have an order. And if you have any questions,